Jon Jones wasn't just dominant, he was untouchable. Not in theory, in reality. Champions prepared for war and walked into puzzles they couldn't solve. He didn't fight for survival, he fought from certainty. And certainty is dangerous, because when losing doesn't feel real, neither do consequences. When you've never been broken inside the cage, you start believing nothing can break you outside it either. That belief doesn't explode. It erodes, slowly, silently. Privilege replaces pressure. Talent replaces discipline. Confidence replaces restraint. And when a fighter becomes immune to doubt, he also becomes immune to warning signs. Jon Jones wasn't reckless. He was insulated. And insulation is what makes a fall feel impossible, until it isn't. Being untouchable changes the way you experience reality. Most fighters grow because they're forced to. They lose. They bleed. They doubt. Jon Jones didn't have that luxury. He wasn't shaped by defeat. He was reinforced by dominance. Every time he entered the cage, the world expected brilliance. And he delivered. But when expectations are always met, when talent keeps solving problems before pressure builds, something inside you starts to recalibrate. You stop preparing for danger. You start assuming control. The early grind that builds humility begins to feel unnecessary. Why suffer the same way when your baseline is already above everyone else? And that's the invisible shift. Not laziness, not collapse. Elevation without fear. When no one can truly threaten you, discipline becomes a choice instead of a necessity. Training is no longer survival, it's optimization. And optimization does not require obsession. Obsession is born from insecurity, from the need to prove, from the fear of being exposed. Jon Jones rarely felt exposed. Even in adversity, he found solutions. Even under pressure, he looked composed. So the internal alarm system never fully developed, and when there is no alarm, there is no urgency. Without urgency, limits become negotiable, rules feel flexible, consequences feel distant. Not because you're reckless, but because you've never been forced to respect them. That's the paradox of extreme talent. It doesn't just win you fights, it protects you from growth. And protection, when prolonged long enough, can slowly become isolation. Invincibility creates distance. Not from opponents, from reality. When you win for too long, when your talent keeps compensating for imperfections, you stop seeing flaws the way others do. Small mistakes don't punish you. Late nights don't expose you. Distractions don't cost you immediately. So the brain adjusts. It learns that consequences are flexible. For most fighters, a single slip becomes a lesson. For Jon Jones, slips rarely translated into collapse. He could underprepare and still outperform. He could drift and still dominate exchanges, and that is the most dangerous reinforcement possible. Because reinforcement builds belief, and belief when unchecked builds immunity. Immunity to doubt, immunity to fear, immunity to correction. The early version of him sharpened every edge out of necessity. The later version operated from assumption. Assumption that talent would cover gaps. Assumption that experience would compensate for erosion. But erosion doesn't announce itself. It accumulates in silence. Reaction times adjust by fractions. Decision-making slows by moments. Sharpness softens invisibly. Not enough to lose immediately, but enough to narrow margins. And at the highest level, margins are everything. He wasn't declining dramatically, he was declining subtly. And subtle decline is harder to detect, because it still looks like dominance. Until it doesn't. Power changes calibration. When you operate for years without real consequences, your internal alarm system rewires. Most fighters are shaped by correction. A loss humbles them. A scare refocuses them. A near finish sharpens them. Jon Jones rarely experienced correction. He experienced escape. He could be pushed and still survive. He could be tested and still adapt mid-fight. He could bend without breaking, and surviving reinforces a dangerous idea, that you are untouchable even when imperfect. But survival is not the same as sharpness. In several title defenses, he wasn't dismantling opponents. He was managing them. controlling distance, extending rounds, winning minutes instead of ending fights. That distinction matters because finishing is authority. Managing is calculation. Calculation means you are aware of risk, and awareness of risk means something has shifted. The early Jon imposed violence with creativity. The later Jon imposed structure with caution. Still brilliant, still effective, but less instinctive, less ruthless. When a fighter transitions from hunter to administrator, the energy changes. Administrators think in margins. Hunters think in certainty. Jones didn't lose his dominance. He modified it, refined it, stabilized it, and stability is powerful, but stability is not the same as inevitability. For years he felt inevitable. Now he felt human, and in combat sports, human is vulnerable. Dominance inside the cage can distort reality outside of it. When you win for years without real consequences, you begin to believe consequences are negotiable. Jon Jones didn't just survive wars in the octagon, he survived scandals outside of it. DUI arrests, hit-and-run charges, failed drug tests, suspensions that could have ended other careers, and yet, every time he came back. Main event, headline slot, title picture intact. That changes a man's psychology, because most fighters fear one mistake ending everything. Jones learned something different. That mistakes didn't end him. They delayed him. There's a difference. When a failed test doesn't permanently remove you, when legal trouble doesn't erase your throne, when controversy doesn't cost your status, your internal sense of danger recalibrates. You stop operating like someone fragile. You start operating like someone insulated, and insulation kills urgency. The early Jon fought like a man who couldn't afford errors. The later Jon lived like errors were survivable, not just in fights, in life. Every suspension became a pause, not a collapse. Every headline became noise, not consequence. And when consequence stops feeling permanent, discipline becomes flexible. Flexible discipline leads to flexible preparation. Flexible preparation leads to narrower margins. This isn't about judging him. It's about understanding the pattern. Repeated survival creates invincibility bias. Inside the cage, that bias makes you confident. Outside the cage, it makes you reckless. And when recklessness is repeatedly forgiven, it reinforces itself. The machine of the sport kept moving. The fans kept watching. The belt kept waiting. So the real controversy isn't whether Jon Jones was great. He was. The real controversy is this. Did the sport protect him so well that he stopped fearing collapse? Because fighters who don't fear collapse eventually test how far they can push the line, and pushing the line always comes with a cost. The only question is, when does the bill arrive? Dominance inside the cage is one thing, control outside of it is another. As Jon Jones's career progressed, he wasn't just fighting opponents, he was negotiating timelines, vacating titles, returning when it suited him, waiting out divisions, letting contenders eliminate each other. That's not weakness, that's leverage. But leverage changes perception, because when a champion disappears and the division freezes, questions grow. Was it strategy or avoidance? Was it evolution or preservation? The sport kept moving. Interim belts, new contenders, rising threats. But Jones moved differently. He didn't rush, he didn't chase, he selected moments. And selection is power. The problem is this: when you control when you fight, you also control what you risk. Some call it intelligence, others call it protection. And in combat sports, protection is controversial. Because the greatest fighters don't just beat contenders, they clear divisions. They don't wait for the right moment, they create it. Jones always returned, but he returned on his terms. And when greatness operates on its own schedule, fans begin to wonder, is this dominance or management? Because once you learn you can step away without losing everything, fear disappears. And fear is what keeps fighters sharp. Remove fear, and urgency softens. The question isn't whether Jon Jones is elite. He is. The question is whether he mastered the sport or learned how to master the system. And those are not the same thing. Jon Jones didn't just beat opponents, he survived everything that should have ended him. That's not mythology, that's record. Other champions lose once, and the division moves on. Jones lost outside the cage, and the division paused. Think about that. Failed tests, legal trouble, public backlash, years away from competition. And every time he returned, the spotlight was still his. The belt was still within reach. The promotion still called his name. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when the business needs you. At some point, Jon Jones stopped being just a fighter. He became an asset. And assets are protected. Not officially, not publicly, but strategically. Look at the timing. When the heavyweight division was at its most dangerous, negotiations stalled. When Francis Ngannou was at peak momentum, contracts collapsed. When new contenders surged, interim belts filled the gap. But the throne stayed reserved. That's where the debate begins. Because dominance is beating whoever stands in front of you. Control is choosing who stands there. And Jones became very good at control. He didn't chase chaos, he minimized it. He didn't gamble legacy, he structured it. Brilliant? Maybe. Calculated? Absolutely. But here's the uncomfortable part. If your career is built on selective risk, can it be compared to fighters who embraced unavoidable danger? If timing always bends in your favor, is that greatness or positioning? The UFC is a business. Businesses protect investments. And for over a decade, Jon Jones was the safest investment in the room. That doesn't erase his talent, it complicates it. Because the GOAT conversation isn't just about skill, it's about circumstances. And circumstances around Jon Jones have never been simple. So the real question isn't whether he was dominant. He was. The real question is this: if the system didn't bend with him, would the legacy look the same? Legacy is never built in a moment, it's built in patterns. Jon Jones built one of the most dominant resumes the sport has ever seen. Youngest champion in UFC history, title defenses against legends, victories across generations. Inside the cage, his skill was undeniable. Unmatched fight IQ, adaptability, creativity under pressure. He solved problems other champions couldn't even read. But legacy isn't measured only by what you conquer. It's measured by how you confront risk, by who you face, when you face them, and why. Jon Jones mastered the art of fighting. That's not up for debate. What is up for debate is the path he chose while mastering it. Because greatness can be wild, or it can be calculated, it can be fearless, or it can be strategic. Sometimes those look identical, until you zoom out. And when you zoom out on Jon Jones' career, you don't just see dominance, you see control. Control of timing, control of narrative, control of consequence. And control is power. But power always comes with a question. If history remembers the wins, will it also remember the context? Will it remember the danger he embraced, or the danger he avoided? Because in combat sports, inevitability is earned, but legacy is argued. And Jon Jones' legacy will never be quiet. Not because he wasn't great, but because he was complicated. And complicated legacies last the longest. So maybe the final verdict isn't ours to give. Maybe it belongs to time. Because time doesn't care about hype. It doesn't care about belts. It doesn't care about business. It cares about truth. And eventually, every career is reduced to one simple question. When the lights were brightest, did you chase greatness? Or did you manage it? One decision,